Hello, humanoids. Welcome to Halfling Hobbies. I'm Halfling Hannah, and today I am joined by Danny Bell, the author of one of my absolute favorite series, The Black Pages. He's not only an author, but also a longtime DM, and we decided to collaborate on a series of videos that are all about teaching you how to write epic adventures. Danny, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into writing and how long you've been a DM?
Yeah, sure. Almost the same on both counts. I knew I wanted to be a writer since I was about 6, reading old Marvel comics and just having the ideas of, what if Spider-Man, fought Hulk's villains, just random stuff like that. That's the beginning of wanting to be a writer. Then you just start wanting to storytell more and more and more. I got into D&D when I was like 8, because I actually had a teacher who gave me old D&D books.
Oh, that's so cool.
And so, and I kind of hid those away. And then, for a little bit, took me a few years to actually start actually playing. But then, once I did, I realized, sometimes the only way we'd actually get a game is if I actually ran it. So, convincing my friends to sit down and play D&D with me and, trying to make it interesting and, getting all of that. Yeah. And it was, you get better as time goes on. By the time you're in high school, all of a sudden now you think you're the best and arguably when you're the worst. But
it's so true. How often do you homebrew?
Almost all the time now. The only times I don't homebrew, actually, I used to run Adventurers League. And even then, I would just end up saying screw it and homebrew stuff out of it. I was just like, I'd look at. I remember I tried to run Storm King's Thunder, and I was just looking at the book and looking at what we're supposed to be doing, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Fine, I'm just adding in stuff. Here we go. Just surprising the players that think they know what's coming, and they don't.
So this first video in this series that we're not even sure how long it's going to be is all about where homebrewing starts. So if you have never homebrewed before, you don't have any idea where to even start with it, it just seems too big and complicated of a process, that is why we are here for you. We are going to take you step by step on how to create a really epic adventure. And we're going to provide you resources absolutely free down in the descriptions of these videos. If you like these resources, be sure to check out Halfling Hobbies over on Patreon. And if you love the ideas that Danny comes up with, be sure to check out the Black Pages series. You will not regret it. All right, let's get into our very first video, where all homebrew begins. My first question for you, Danny, is, do you think that DMs should plan out their entire adventure before they start?
Good question. The answer is maybe not. It depends on what you're playing, right? This is I think that before you even get into that, you need to know who you're playing with and what you want, what you want, or what they want. Some players just want to roll dice and attack things. That's all they want. All they want to do is they just want to hit the monster, get the gold, and then go home. Yeah. But if you are someone who, loves reading, you love stories, you love, the plot twists and things, you love, everything that makes you feel emotion when you're consuming your media, your pop culture, whatever it might be, then yes, you should. Because a lot of times, you can't know what you're writing to if you don't know where you're going. You need to set that up front.
One of my favorite quotes that I really live by is that if you prepare enough in advance, it allows you to be perfectly free. And I think that's absolutely true. A lot of the times, a lot of us feel kind of trapped in DMing because we haven't prepared enough. We don't have enough things to draw off of to be free in the moment to do what our players, whatever they want to do. So I'm definitely a proponent of planning out your campaign and your adventure. Even if you don't end up using some of it, that's okay. If you need it, it's still there. And we've talked about this before, how if you're an author, like the point is the story and coming up with like cool ideas and a cool story. And if your players actually engage and interact with it, that's just a bonus.
Yeah. And this is the thing I would say. This is the big warning up front for anyone who's trying to who wants to jump into this series and wants to overplot and overplan and just create this great huge original story. The thing about it is that you need to understand that this game, as much as you're putting into it, is not for you, it's for your players.
Absolutely.
So a big part of this is that, even though you may set up a lot of emotional beats and you may set up, bad guys and you may set up all those things, you have to be fully prepared for anything you write down to just die on the vine or not go the way you plan, right? You're not writing a book. If I'm writing a book, the person said the thing because that's what I thought they should say. The hero won in the end because that's what was supposed to happen. Imagine you're on a computer screen and you're writing a novel, and as you're writing, suddenly the typing starts happening automatically on the screen as you're writing. You're just writing against something,
and you have to respond to it.
Yeah, there's probably a movie in there, where the narrator was writing against the world. That's that's exactly what it is. You can't control them. They have to,
and you really shouldn't try. You really shouldn't try. Yeah, because that's their contribution to the story. And in the end, if you want it to be your whole table story, that's the goal, is to interact together.
Yeah. And the danger sometimes I think with DMs is, they get so in love with their story they wrote that they can get upset and they can start playing against the players if they're not doing what they want them to. And so this is my
railroading comes to mind at that point.
Yeah.
It seems like we kind of have two spectrums here, right? You got the ones who maybe overplan and get too attached to that story that they have. And so the danger there is railroading. And then you have the opposite end of the spectrum, which is you have DMs who don't want to plan at all. They want to just come into the session completely blank and fly by the seat of their pants. Like I've heard this before. I just work better flying by the seat of my pants. And I don't know when that became a positive. That used to always be a very negative thing, right? So what are some of the dangers and pitfalls of that flying by the seat of your pants?
So it's funny you use that exact phrase because we did not plan for this. You just said that. Yeah. So in the author community, in the writing community, there is a word for a type of author, and it is called a pantser. It is.
Is it from that phrase?
Yes, someone who is writing by the seat of their pants. The problem with it is that those stories, more often than not, start off with an amazing idea, and then once that idea kind of ran its course, they don't know how to end the story, and they don't have the structure and the arcs and everything needed. So now it is just a story that is just kind of existing and no one really knows what to do next with it. And it just sort of ends.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of novels written like that, where someone comes in with no structure and they write, and you'll actually end up seeing even the length of the chapters change as the book goes.
Yeah. And as a teacher, I always tell my students all the time, I was like, you have to have an outline because otherwise you're just going to stop instead of end. And that's my kind of difference of the two. There's a difference between just stopping and it feeling incomplete versus having an actual ending that is satisfying. Even if it's not like a happy ending, it still needs to be satisfying. So I think there's dangers on both ends of the spectrum. We want to be a healthy middle. We want to go in the middle here.
Speaking of that, I will tell you, one of the first things I tell all of my students who I teach writing to, people that I mentor writing to and I tutor writing to, is I say, think of your outline and your plotting like a road trip. If you are getting ready to go on a road trip, right, and you don't know where the road trip is going to, you're just going to pick a direction, you're going to fly, it's going to be a lot of fun. And then eventually you're going to get really bored. And eventually you're going to go, I'm just tired of this. And we're going to get home. And it's just going to kind of it's going to suck.
Yeah, it's going to fizzle out.
But the other side of it is that if you are too rigid with your road trip, you go, we are going here and we are stopping for gas here and we are getting here and we are arriving in time at this location.
Yeah.
and what ends up happening is you miss the most fun and the most memorable parts of any road trip. I mean, like one of the last trips I did, one of the coolest things was I stopped in like the Mojave Desert, and the clouds, these storm clouds had kind of come up just to like a certain point and it stopped. So I'm like, on one half of it, there's no rain, and I'm looking into the rain here, and there's a sunset going down.
Oh, wow.
With like this insane, huge thundercloud on one side and like this, kind of like, empty night on the other side.
Yeah.
That's a memory, right?
And you never could have planned that. You weren't going to say, okay, I think there's a storm coming into the Mojave Desert. I'm going to stop at this point and I'm going to see it and it's going to be great, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same way with some of the best parts of our D&D stories is something that the players do that's like, I never could have planned for that. That was amazing. And I love that. Yeah. And then another thing we've kind of talked about before is if a lot of DMs struggle with actually finishing a campaign. And a lot of times that's because they never had an endpoint in mind. If you don't know where that endpoint is, it's really hard to finish. And it's really hard to keep your players engaged with what you're doing if you don't even know what you're doing. So
I think of that as like a DM who sees their game as like a season of a TV show, but they want their first season to be 93 episodes because they don't know how to end the first season. Like, I think that's the bit is like, you have to go, okay, don't be afraid to have, to have, cliffhangers, to have, points where this ends and now the next half of the story is this is happening.
It's all still in the same idea, in the same vein of you need to plan. You really do. If you want to run a homebrew campaign, you really can't just sit down and do it. You have to kind of plan it out. And what we're going to do is we're going to teach you how to do that. So let's start at the very beginning where all homebrews begin. And that's with an idea. So I really believe that any homebrew that you do, it all just starts with one idea. And from there, you ask, what if? And you talked about that a little bit with the Spider-Man comics, right? Marvel had a whole bunch of comics that were just what if comics. And they're even starting a TV show that's just what if, because some of the craziest and coolest ideas start with what if. So if you're looking for a place to start, that's a really good place to start.
I know that we might be getting ahead of ourselves in this as well, but, don't be afraid to look to media. Don't be afraid to take an idea, right? To consume media. It's every idea that has ever existed, whether it's been in philosophy or literature or, you name it, has always come from someone had an idea previously and someone built upon that idea. That idea made them think of something another way. And so on, so it goes. And whatever,
and add your own spin onto it. Just because it's a cool idea, like feel free to take that and spin it.
Yeah.
That's where some of the best ideas come from.
You is what you're going to want to talk about, right? So don't force it. If there's an idea to you that is not interesting to you, right? You're going to really struggle to talk about it and to like make it cool, right? So just don't rush it. Wait till you get the idea. Wait till you get that thing that reminds you of something that's neat, and then just do it. And and it's as simple as that. Whatever the story idea is, it's something you at home can do.
Yeah. And so the question often is, where does creativity come from? Where do these ideas come from? I'm not a creative person. I don't know what to do or where to start. And yes, us telling you come up with an idea can be very intimidating. However, it's really important to know that it doesn't have to be yours. Creativity rarely happens in a bubble. And one of my favorite quotes that I kind of stole and tweaked because, that's what we're talking about here, is that a good DM borrows, but a great DM steals. Steal ideas from your favorite books, from your favorite TV shows, from your favorite movies. Just consume creative content. The only way that you're going to come up with these fun, unique ideas is if you are consuming creative content that is influencing you and helping you come up with those ideas. I have a little notebook. I get one of those little moleskin notebooks that are real tiny that I can fit in any bag that I'm carrying. And I will, if I see someone that I'm like, ooh, they look like they'd make a good NPC, I write it down. If I come up with an idea or I hear an idea or I have a thought that I think is really interesting, I write them down. And I would highly suggest you do the same thing, because when you sit down to write a campaign, you are going to stare at that blank page and have no idea where to start. Whereas if you have a little journal that you just scribble in all the time, you can flip back through that, take one of those ideas, or they will trigger a new one. And it will be far easier to start with an idea. And then the next part that we're going to talk about, start asking questions. So after you have your idea, what are some of your favorite questions to ask, Danny?
You kind of said it up front, which is like, what if,
yeah,
or how, or whatever it might be. But again, this kind of goes to the nature of the type of story, right? So, you have your idea. And I think the first thing you have to do is you have to decide, when we're going to have this idea for this game, are we going to kind of do the world building down to the character? Or are we going to make this a character-focused thing, and then we're going to build the world based around that?
And that depends on what idea you have. Is your idea based on a character, or is your idea based on a big concept?
Right. So, I'll give a couple of pop culture ideas, right? So look at something like Fallout, right? And the idea there is, what if we almost achieved kind of like this, utopia, and then all the nations went together and dropped bombs on each other. And now, years and years and years later, someone's coming out of a vault to explore the nuclear wasteland. Well, we're doing the world there first, because now we're talking about, okay, well, this is a big event we're talking about, and we're going all the way down. And then you have to kind of drill down into who is the player going to be within that world. On the other hand, say, for example, you came up with an idea like the Dresden Files, right? And I guarantee when that idea came up, the first thing Jim Butcher decided was, what if it was a hard-boiled private detective who could do magic? Now you have your person. Now that's someone that they want to write. I want to write magic detective. But now, what kind of world do they inhabit? Well, it's a detective story, so probably Chicago. Okay, we're going to use Chicago. Well, now what exists in Chicago? And you start building out. You go, okay, well, would vampires be there? Well,
right.
Who else?
Because you have that magic element. So it's like, is everything magical? Is it just this person? How does the world react to that magic? And those questions just start building one on the other. So when you have your idea, just start asking questions and keep asking questions. So here's just a checklist, a general, you may ask different questions, but here's a nice checklist. So number one, what is the world like because of this? Whatever idea you have, does it affect the world that you're going to have your setting in? Or is it not as important to the world as a whole? What is valued most in this world? If it's something like you're talking about magic and only a few people have magic, well, that immediately makes magic very valuable, right? So you have to kind of ask those questions about your world too. Who would be most powerful in the world with this idea? Who might oppose this idea? And then finally, what conflicts does this idea cause? Those are some of my favorite ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, if you, look up any list of writing prompts ever, you'll find stuff in there that will lead you down that rabbit hole. And I mean, even amongst the questions you're asking in here, each one of those questions will lead to 100 more questions if you let it. And you go as deep into each one of these as you want. So for example, even the idea of, magic, right? Well, does only a few people have it? Well, is it valued or is it hated? Right? It becomes a thing, do people know about it or do they not know about it?
your opposition, you could have like a religious group that feels like magic is evil. And if you're using magic, then it's actually detrimental to the world because you're stealing it from the weave, right? Even in D&D, if we look at that. So you're stealing it from the weave, you're distorting the weave, and that hurts it. So you have this whole group dedicated to hunting down and killing mages in order to preserve the weave. Like,
yeah, Eberron does something like that with, look at all of Eberron's religions, and up front they may just seem, kind of whatever. But when you actually start delving deep into them and you start seeing how they interact with each other, they're actually really well thought out. A good example of that is the Silver Flame. I know a lot of people that kind of refer to them as like D&D Jedis, but if you really dig deep into what they believe. They really believe that like any kind of aberration out there is wrong and needs to be destroyed. So that means, someone like a shifter who could just be a regular person, could be hunted down by the Silver Flame.
And that has worldwide consequences. And especially that's something that a player would be concerned about if they play a shifter. It leads to a whole bunch of more questions. So one of the easiest ways to kind of walk through this step of the process is to just do it. So Danny and I actually came up with just a general idea that both of us are going to build off of. And we mainly decided to do this, and it was Danny's idea, and it's a fantastic idea. We mainly decided to do this because as we were talking, we realized that we're totally different DMs. We have totally different styles of doing things. And so we thought it would be really fun to show that with one idea, how vastly different of campaigns you can create, even though they're centered around the same idea. So the idea that we came up with was a heist. And Danny, would you like to go first with your idea for a heist?
Sure. And I want to also state that while we're not going to get super deep into the ideas up front because this is going to
take way too long.
we're going to be revealing it as we go. So for example, in future videos, we will talk about antagonists, and then we'll get into who that is. We'll get into like a lot of different things. So the kind of base idea that we had, or kind of our what if for the two of us, was what if a heist, but in D&D? And now we know that this has been done before. Right. But we also know that.
And we're totally fine with that. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's also been, there's also been a ton of heist movies, and heist movies can be whatever it wants. Right. There's a lot of,
and they never get old. People still go and watch them. Ocean 15, people still going to watch it.
And that was my idea here, was given the fact that, we can say a heist, and you at home right now can have an idea in your head of what it'll be.
Which, if you do have an idea, write it down or put it in the comments below. I'd love to see all of the different ideas that come up from this one. That would be really cool.
And I guarantee that our ideas are going to probably be different than your ideas. Whatever you had in your head, the first second you started watching this, we're about to have different ideas. Yep. So my idea, in a nutshell, the very basic idea of it is that there is an elven land that was for a very long time ruled through like this sort of like primordial magical artifact, a crown. And whenever the elven leader wore this crown, they would kind of travel to all the different corners of their land, and they would kind of have like these like big, almost like revival events where they would kind of go out and they talk to the different towns one by one. And the idea is that whoever they spoke to while wearing this crown, if they were an elf, would just inherently follow them and believe them, right? They would have almost like compulsory belief in their king or queen. And so at some point, as time went on, the sort of monarchy was retired. The crown was put away, and that is not how the elven lands were ruled ever again. Now we are in a modern day, in kind of a city, and it has been decided that, and I'm taking taking inspiration here from like the Great Treasures of Japan, where there's like the three great treasures and they've just never seen, like they're not shown to the public. Remember there was like with the great sword, Emperor Akihito was like gifted it and didn't look at it. Kind of like that thing. Like the idea is like nobody has like even seen this for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
They are about to put it on display in this, big metropolitan city. And it's going to be on display under heavy garden watch for a week at this museum. Mm-hmm. After that, it's going to be transported to a vault and where it will be sealed away forever and nobody will ever see it again.
Interesting.
The antagonist is somebody who is an elf themselves, and they have decided that they want to rule their elven lands, and so they are going to steal this crown. Now we get into the players. The players are, who are they? How do they fit into this? How are they going to try to steal it first? How are they going to try to prevent the theft? Whatever it might be, that's a whole other question.
Yep.
And we'll get into that later, but that's the basic idea. The very basic setting is that there is a crown that when worn by an elf can rule the elves, and someone wants it.
Very cool. Very cool idea. I love that. All right. So same idea of a heist, right? But here's where my mind went. The question I asked myself was, what if there was no resurrection magic? And this idea itself isn't even original. I mean, think of Tomb of Annihilation. There's no resurrection magic there. But I was like, what if we take it from that island and we expand it to be the entire world? There's no resurrection magic at all. See how you can take another idea that you like and then kind of twist it? So from there, I started thinking, okay, what if the players were the ones to bring resurrection magic to the material plane for the first time? And what would that look like? So in my idea for a heist, the players are plotting to steal resurrection magic from the 8th layer of hell. So the 8th layer of hell is Kania, and it's extremely hard to get to. And in order to get to it, the players are going to have to go through all levels of hell and be just one level above Asmodeus, which is really an interesting concept to me. So in this, for my players' backstories, I'm going to have something very specific there, which is you have to have one person that you've lost that you would go through hell to bring back. And that's the only thing that I would have in their backstory. And so that's my idea for a heist. So you have one that's a crown and a museum kind of heist. You have one that's literally stealing from these ancient beings. And again, I would love to know your idea for a heist down in the comments below. So now that we have our idea, we can start asking questions about it. So in my case, what would the world look like without resurrection magic? Who would be the most powerful people now? So the churches would still have healing magic, and there would still be wizards that have healing magic, but death is much more permanent. And adventurers probably would be much fewer, because the risk is way greater. I mean, once you die, there's no coming back. So that's one of the things I really thought about through here and talking about my players as adventurers, when adventurers aren't very common.
I'd also say in your world, I would assume that things like military might play because you can't heal people up. Yeah. People are afraid of death. Churches would probably look a lot like the churches we have today, where people are like, oh, sure, I can pray for you, but we can't stop death. That's God's plan.
Yeah.
You would have, if a wizard could cast a fireball and obliterate a village, they're going to be feared a whole lot more, knowing that
suddenly certain spells are maybe even forbidden or taboo because they cause too much damage or death. And people really fear them. Perhaps people fear any kind of damaging magic. There's a lot of places you can go with that, and you just keep asking questions, and it's up to you and the world that you create. And suddenly we have a homebrew world that we never decided before. So Danny, our next step is going to be creating your antagonists and villains. And that is what we are going to talk about in our second video of this series. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. I certainly hope it gives your game advantage. Halfling Hannah here, and Danny signing out. Also, big thanks to all my patrons. I really appreciate you guys. You guys are amazing. Couldn't do it without you.